In this video, I'll be showing you some of the basic controls of the PrusaSlicer software and show you how to prepare your 3D object file for printing. The first thing that we'll do is go ahead and import our STL file. You can do this by simply dragging and dropping the file into PrusaSlicer, and then your object will appear on the build plate. You can also import 3D object files by going to the File menu, Import, then choosing the first option. To cover some basic mouse controls, you can use the scroll wheel on your mouse or the pinch gesture on your trackpad to zoom in and out. By holding down left click and moving your mouse or trackpad, you can rotate the build plate and change your view of your model. And then by holding down the right click and moving your mouse or trackpad, you can change the position of the build plate on your screen. Let's cover some of the basic tools in the toolbar on the left-hand side of the screen. The first tool is the Move tool. By clicking this, you'll see these three boxes appear that correspond to the different axes on your 3D model. By clicking on one of these boxes and dragging along that axis, you can precisely move your 3D object along that axis. If you click and hold on your object, you can move your mouse around and move the entire object at once across the build plate. The next tool in the toolbar is the Scale tool. When we click this, you'll see these different boxes appear that allow you to rescale and resize different dimensions of your 3D object. We can see in this error down here that when I imported this object, it was a little too big for the build plate and thus would not print. So we'll need to reduce its size a little. To do this, I'll grab this orange box here, click and hold, and I'll just drag it inward to make it smaller, down to around 25% for a nice quick print. The next tool in the toolbar is the Rotate tool. If you click on that, you'll see these three circles appear, as well as with these boxes that correspond to the different axes. Once again, similarly to the Move tool, if you click on one of these boxes, you can rotate precisely along each of those axes. If you make a mistake or don't like a change that you made, you can use Ctrl-Z or Command-Z on your keyboard to undo that change. The next tool we have in the toolbar is the Place on Face tool. If we click on that, you'll see these shaded areas appear in your object. As the name suggests, clicking on one of these shaded areas places that face directly onto the build plate. But because our 3D object was oriented in the correct direction before, I'll go ahead and select this bottom face. Now our dinosaur is upright again. And the last tool in our toolbar is the Measure tool. You can use this tool to measure the distance and angle between 2 points on your object. So after we select it, we can click on one point, then click on another. And as you can see, it will show us the precise distance and angle between those 2 points. Now that we've covered some of the basic controls and tools in PrusaSlicer, we're ready to continue preparing our 3D object for printing. Let's turn our attention to the top right portion of the window. This first drop-down menu is your print settings. When we click this menu, you'll see a couple different system presets that refer to the layer height of the print. To put it simply, the larger the layer height, the faster your print will be, but the lower quality or vertical resolution your print will have. Conversely, with the lower layer height, the slower the print will be, but the higher quality or higher vertical resolution your print will have. For now, we'll keep it at the 0.20mm structural preset. The next setting is the filament setting, and this pertains to the type of filament that you'll be using to print your object. For this example, I'll be using the Prusamint Galaxy Black PLA filament, so I'll go ahead and select Prusamint PLA. But there are plenty of other system presets, as well as the presets that we make here in the Innovation Lab that correspond to each of the different filaments that we offer. This last drop-down menu here is for the printer setting. Since we'll be using the Prusa Mark IV input shaper with the 0.4mm nozzle, we'll just keep that option selected. Now that we've set those 3 settings accordingly, we can go ahead and click the Slice Now button, and that will slice our 3D object into different layers that our printer can use to fully print our object. You can move these arrows here along this slider to inspect and view each of the layers throughout the printing process. You'll notice there is a warning down here, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. With this particular model, we will need some supports because there are a few sections where the printer may be printing in midair and is likely to cause a print failure. So if you determine that your model needs supports, you can come up here to the Supports drop-down menu. And I'll go ahead and select Support on Build Plate Only. We'll reslice this. Now we can see that our 3D object is fully supported, thus mitigating the risk of a print failure. To circle back on layer height, let's zoom into the dinosaur's head. You can see that on these curved parts here, there are some gaps. And one thing about having a higher layer height is the phenomenon of stair-stepping, so we can visibly see the different layer lines, especially on curved surfaces. Now this is a smaller print, and I'd like it to have higher quality, so let's try selecting a lower layer height. We'll go ahead with the 0.10mm Fast Detail preset. And since we generated our support material already, we want to transfer these settings. We'll go ahead and slice. Now, if we inspect the curve on the dinosaur's head, you can see it's much more smooth and those layer lines will be a bit more diminished. The next setting we can look at is the infill percentage. Infill refers to the inside of the object and how its structural integrity is supported when printing, which you can set all the way up to 100% for a solid infill or 0% for a completely hollow part. For this example, I'm fine with leaving the infill at 15%. Then finally, our last setting we can look at is the brim checkbox. When you have 3D objects that have a low surface area where it attaches to the print bed, it may be wise to put a brim on it, which will allow better bed adhesion and reduce the likelihood of a failure. But since we have the support structures directly on the build plate, as well as the large surface area of the legs, we can leave this unchecked for now. But now that we have all of our settings set up, and we have our model exactly the way that we want, we can go ahead and export this file to G-code that can then be used to print the object on the Prusa Mark IV. We can hit Export G-code, and it'll save this file to My Downloads. Hit OK on this, where I can then later put it onto a flash drive to plug into the Prusa Mark IV.